Hello, I'm Rory Dalglish. I'm the Minister of Haxby and Wigginton Methodist Church, and this video is the second video for the beginning of our journey with a Methodist way of life, and particularly using the tube map illustration that has been generated by the Evangelism and Growth team in our head office in London and across the networks where they work. Today is a follow-up to last week's video. Last week's video was an introduction to the introduction, and this week's is a conversation with Andy Fishburne. Andy is a Methodist minister. He's based on the Isle of Man, and he is a discipleship and faith formation officer within the Methodist Evangelism and Growth team. So Andy's been part of the genesis of the tube map, and I wanted to have a chat with him about how it came to be and how it was used and what the team hope it will produce and offer to the church in its life. Every second video will be a conversation. Each video for each of the focuses, the first one will be an introduction to it, and the second video, like this one, will be a conversation with one or more people about their response to it and their experience of whatever the theme is for that week, for that fortnight in our church's life. So I hope you enjoy this. I certainly enjoyed the conversation with Andy, and that it offers some scope for thinking about how we can be more creative, more playful even, in the way we approach, explore, understand all that it means to follow Jesus today. So, as I said, delighted to have Andy Fishburne join us. Andy is part of the church's discipleship and evangelism and growth team, let me get that right, which is sort of centered around London, but Andy lives himself on the Isle of Man and works with the team remotely and in all kinds of interesting ways. And Andy's had a really strong hand in the genesis of the map that we're going to be spending some time with in our church. So welcome, Andy. It's good to have you with us, firstly. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I love seeing the pictures of the map in your. Is it a foyer? Is it like sort of an entrance?
We've called it the hub. It's so it's kind of in the middle of the building. It's our main entrance.
Oh wow.
Into the whole of the building. We have a front entrance to the chapel space. But yeah. And everyone who will come into our building for guides and brownies and every other group activity will go through that. So we're quite curious about how people respond to it.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
To kick off then, Andy, maybe could you just tell us about the idea of the map and how its genesis, how it came to be?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it came because we wanted a visual way to express what discipleship was. Discipleship is such a vague concept in a way. It's absolutely central, as I'm sure you all know, to what it means to be a Christian. We are disciples. But it's such a vague, elusive concept. We know it's following Jesus, but we can't see Jesus, and we don't literally move after him. So what does it mean to follow Jesus? So we were looking for some way to make that simple and clear, and ideally visual, in a way that it will stick. I've always been really keen on trying to communicate ideas visually and clearly. I was a teacher for a long time, so that getting something across with a diagram is really, and that's kind of in me. That's a core part of how I communicate. So we were looking around for all kinds of things. Then we stumbled across this idea of a tube map or a train map as a way of representing it. And sort of alongside that, we had a Methodist way of life, which was a fairly established thing within the Methodist Church for a couple of years now, which at its heart has a list of 12 commitments, which were presented as a list. I'm sure many of you have got the card which presents them as a list, the 12 things that we commit to do as disciples. So I thought there's a real possibility of bringing these two things together and having the Methodist way of life commitments, not just as a linear list, but in a way that is visual and creative and playful. So we thought, well, let's make the 12 Methodist way of life commitments like 12 stations on a tube map. And the idea is we travel around those stations. We're on a journey, but there's a sense of movement and dynamism to it. So that's really where it came from. It's a way of expressing in a non-list form what it means to be a disciple. So the 12 Methodist way of life commitments are effectively a kind of list of things that disciples do, things that God is involved with in the world, places where we meet God. So the stations, we think, are places where you're likely to meet God. If you do the things on the stations, God's into that kind of thing. So they're almost like thin places where we can meet God. One way I tend to think of it quite a lot is it's almost like the list of commitments of a Methodist way of life is a bit like the Ten Commandments, so presented as a flat list, whereas the tube map thing is a bit more like a parable. So it's the same content, it's the same core message, but just presented in a way that we can get our heads around and dig into and ask questions of and think, well, if discipleship is a bit like a journey on a train system, I know a bit about journeying on a train system. So how does that shape what my discipleship's like? So it kind of works in both ways.
Yeah, because disciple is and discipleship are quite confusing and even intimidating words for lots of people that are quite abstract, as you say. They are, our gospel on Sunday was Jesus saying, hate your mother and father and give away all your stuff.
Yeah.
And people measure themselves by what seem like extreme acts of obedience to Jesus. But as you say, in the midst of our daily lives, that's where God is found, and God is in the encounter with us. And the practices enable us to perhaps explore and deepen that experience of God, as well as encounter God in others as we do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the sense that you're not often on your own on a tube train.
Yeah.
So we're in this together. We've all got our own individual journeys, but we also travel together. So there's the sense that we're all together on this train going around this beautiful, crazy discipleship journey around all the stations.
And the point is not to pass or fail, is it? Or to feel like you've mastered a station, just that you're willing to travel through and stop and ask what it means to be there and explore a little of what that might look and feel like.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the list version of it does come across a bit like a tick list that you've got to complete, but I'd hope that the tube map version is a little more, I don't know, more gracious in that sense. I think it's helpful to see the whole picture in front of you. So as a disciple, as a Methodist disciple, we're kind of saying that we try to do these things as far as we're able. Some of them will be natural to us, some of them will be more challenging, but it's quite useful to see the whole lot of them spread out before you. So if your experience of discipleship is turning up on a Sunday for a worship service, that's good. But if you see the whole lot spread out on the map in front of you, you realise, that's just one bit in one corner of the map. There's a whole load more. So in a gentle and friendly and kind way, hopefully it's pointing out that there might be more than you're experiencing at the moment, but also it's not intimidating. It's not impossible. It's doable.
And so how do you hope the image will be used? I mean, the thing I loved at conference was that it was embodied. You were walking around on it. You were standing in these places. It wasn't an idea or a kind of map that you would hold so much as something you were on. And we're very grateful that you've helped us to do that in our church's life. You also talked about playfulness in this, which I've said as well in our congregation. This is something to play with, not in a trivial sense, but in a spirit of not being fearful of where it might lead us and what might be exciting and what might be actually rather dull, but we don't know until we have a go. I guess I'm kind of answering the question for you, but in terms of your intentions of how it will be used, and in a context like ours where you've seen where it is and what's possible, I mean, how are you as a team hoping we'll get the most out of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. And one answer to that is that you're one of the early piloters. So in a way, I want to wait and see how it's used. And therefore, for next year, we can then say, we can use your example as a way to, inspire others. I mean, at a conference where we sort of launched this idea at the conference this year at Telford, what we did was we invited people. When I say invited, we kind of grabbed people as they were coming past and asked them to look at the map and, you say, to stand on the station that felt at home for them, that seemed to come most naturally. So we called it their home station. So for some people that might be worship, that's their thing. For some people it might be challenging injustice. That's what makes them tick. That's their thing. and to acknowledge your particular gift, your particular aspect of discipleship that's yours as a gift for the church, I think is really helpful. We gave people a badge to kind of symbolize their home station. So in some way, I think that's a good first step for people, is to invite people to look at the whole range and just think, what's my home station? What's my gift to the church? What's my bit within the body of Christ? And from doing that with a range of groups in different contexts, it's amazing the kind of spread that you get. And I think that's a beautiful thing, that we're all disciples, but we've all got our own things, our own vocations. The next step was we invited the people who were standing on their home station to then look around, because the tube map's got these coloured links, just a few suggestive links taking from one station to another. So we asked people to pray and discern where God might be taking them next on their journey. Where might God be calling them to move to next in this next season ahead? Now, that might have been for them as an individual. It may be for them as a church, as part of a church community. For people who are involved in a church in a kind of leadership way, that might be on behalf of the people they serve in leadership. But either way, thinking of what the next step on the journey might be. And that might be going deeper into your home station. If your home station was the Helping Creation Flourish station, there's loads of work to do on that. There's loads of things for you to do personally to dig deep into that and to be a gift to the wider church. But it may also be something which is a stretch, something which doesn't come naturally. So we asked people just to wait and discern where God was leading him. And for me, that was one of the most beautiful things about doing this at conference, because I would sort of go off and go and get them a badge from where we had them stored. So I was away for like a minute. And then when I came back, I said, so have you heard from God? And everyone had. It was such a, we're kind of putting the pressure on God to deliver in a way, but it worked. Everybody did get a sense of where they were being called to next. And then we gave them a little paper train ticket and punched it with the station they were going to, just as a reminder of that moment. And then we prayed for them. I think that was one of the most beautiful things as well, is to pray for them in their discipleship. And that felt so good to be able to do that. So how that translates to your church, I know you've got ideas, Rory, but there'd be the sort of things I'd encourage, that sense of establishing your home station, discerning where the next step might be, and a prayerful blessing on all the disciples on their journey.
I think I remember from conference as well, if you said, I want to explore this or that, there were some suggestions as to what you might do. And we're going to do that as well, and give people an opportunity to just try maybe something. So what we're doing, which is a step on, and I'd just love to have your take on this, is we're asking people for the next 2 weeks. Well, it'll be a week from the Sunday when this video goes out, in the first fortnight of our exploring in the introductory phase, to really just spend some time with that "what's my home station" question, because it might not be the thing that you immediately think it is, or that you want it to be, and you need to be honest about that as well. But we're also asking people which one they're most afraid of, which was suggested to me by someone I was talking to about the idea, who said you might learn a lot. People might learn a lot actually about what your church is avoiding, individually, but kind of corporately, looking at the numbers of people who indicate, have the courage to indicate that they, one of those stations feels very unplayful and very actually challenging, for whatever reason. And I wonder how you feel about that as a kind of supplementary question.
It's a great question. It's a really, really good question. Yeah, I love it. You mentioned earlier about the passage in Luke's Gospel about counting the cost of discipleship, and one of the illustrations there, which is kind of similar to this, is that Jesus said that if you're building a tower, you might have the foundation built, but some of you don't yet complete the upper levels of the tower. You kind of stop at the foundation. So for all of us, there's a sense that we're already disciples. We're already doing at least some of the stations in some way, shape, or form, but there probably are unbuilt layers of the tower.
Mm.
And the higher you get, the scarier it gets. So yeah, that question of fear into it in a gentle, playful way, which I'm sure that you are. I think that's really, really helpful. It's easy to kind of duck and dodge and weave our way around some of the commitments. So to face up to that, I think, is really, really good.
Yeah.
When the Methodist way of life existed just as a list of 12 things, it just so happened that the evangelism ones were at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
And subconsciously, I think that kind of gave people the permission to say, well, we'll leave that until we've done the top ones. We'll get to that at some point. Yeah. And often they're the ones which people are most scared of from talking to people. So identifying which ones are scary, I think it's great. But of course, I'm sure you are doing it in a friendly, supportive way that together we can work on this. And there'll probably be some people who that is their home station, so they'll be able to offer their sort of wisdom and advice.
Yeah, but there is rigor to it, isn't there? Because we are. I've been asked a number of times, what makes this a Methodist way of life? And the answer isn't that these are unique practices to us, but they're framed in the beginnings of our church in honest, real conversation that are supportive and about accountability, and that's what we're hoping for. That we've said as much. Our Sunday and Wednesday services that introduce each theme are the smallest part of actually that focus, and the conversations that happen and the exploring that happens in the fortnight after and beyond is where it really matters. I was fascinated by one of the, and I couldn't find it after I'd looked, but one of the commentaries I was looking at on that passage where Jesus says, give away give up all your possessions, said actually possessions is a bit tricky in translation, and it could equally be attachments. I found that a very helpful way of thinking about discipleship. It's about willingness, isn't it? It's not about proficiency or skill or feeling that you'll get it right, but about being willing to pick up and put down things as you travel. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's interesting to look at the 12 stations and notice what isn't a station. There's no station about acquiring goods. There's no station necessarily about maintaining a church building or all of those things. We have to get by, but they're not core to what we do. So what isn't a station is interesting, because there's obviously the invitation then to let loose of that and travel on and to focus on what is there.
Yeah. And then lastly, just thinking about, I don't know if you as a team have sat down and kind of raked over the experience of using this at conference and what surprises there were for you in the way it was used. You've talked a bit about that, but maybe some of the outcomes, because I was fascinated towards the end of Methodist conference as to which buckets of badges were nearly empty and which ones had hardly been touched, and what that said about us as a tradition at the moment, as a denomination, and conference being, soaked in the tradition, hopefully Methodists who are there as senior leaders in the local, in the whole of the Methodist Church's life. But did you have any insights as a team, or even just yourself, observationally or otherwise, about what we saw at conference in the way the map was engaged with?
Yeah, it was interesting. We had as you say, we had this kind of cheeky kind of service status board. So for each of the 12 stations, we had a kind of service indicators with good service or partly delayed or cancelled even for some of them. But the badge that went the most, in fact, there are very few of these around in my possession now, is the notice badge, noticing God in Scripture and the world. That was by far the most popular one. And I think that's good. I think that's particularly for people who are at conference and come there to do a particular business role. I think that's really encouraging, that actually lots of people there were still noticing God in Scripture and in the world around them. So I think that's really, really encouraging. I don't think there was a clear one that came last. There were quite a few that came that weren't picked up so much, but we didn't quite keep track of them as accurately as we could have done, because we we were also having a system where people could come back, as well as getting a badge for their home station, they could come back and tell us how they'd earned another badge,
Yeah.
earned in sort of loosest, most friendly way.
Yeah.
So people would come back and say, oh, I had an amazing experience where I noticed God as I was walking on the way to the conference venue. I saw loads of people saw a rainbow one day, and they were really struck by the sunlight bursting through the cloudy weather. So they noticed God, so we gave them the notice badge. So it was really, really interesting. One thing that's come up since then, which I think I need to think more about and we need to sort of push into, is we here on the Isle of Man over the summer, we had a couple of agricultural shows, as a lot of sort of rural places have. And some of the Methodists here took the leftover badges to this agricultural show and had that same conversation with just regular, normal people who are passing by. And they could still all answer the question. So normal people who didn't necessarily have a church attachment or anything like that, they could still look at this picture and say, yeah, my thing, I feel like my spiritual practice is challenging injustice or helping people or caring or prayer. It was eye-opening to me that was a way into a conversation with people about something deeper than you'd normally get in that sort of setting. So I think for me, that's really, really exciting about this, is that you can have that conversation on the tube map, not just with your normal churchgoers who are kind of, in some sense, already committed to discipleship, but you can point out how all people have got hallmarks of discipleship in their life already. It's a really expansive and open thing, and I think that's really cool and really exciting.
I was chatting to Holly, one of your team members, at conference on the last day, and looking at the service map, and it was fascinating for me that the challenge map had a good service running, and underneath it was tell, which is one of the evangelism words, and the service was cancelled. And I said to Holly, I wonder what that says. I think that's one of the things to mine in this information, and what we see and hear about ourselves is that people felt that they were challenging injustice, but that in the safety of a Methodist conference where everyone is going to be friendly, at least, the invitation to say go and just tell 3 people what your biggest question is about God. There was very little uptake of that, and that's why I asked the question, because I think it's going to be fascinating for us to see what people are curious about, what they avoid, and where they plant themselves as home stations.
Absolutely. I mean, on that telling, that idea that it's good to have one-to-one conversations with people where we listen to them and their spiritual story and tell them about ours. So this kind of thing might provide a language for that. So you don't, as a church member, you don't need to be able to rattle off the whole of the gospel and tell everybody everything. But you can say, well, my home station is challenging injustice, to use your example, because I'm passionate about, how God weeps over the state of the world, and how the rich people get so much and poor people are trodden on, and that really sort of gets at me, and I feel that, and I want to do something about it. So that is a very natural thing for someone to say, and that's a really good conversation opener to have, and then to ask people, so what makes you tick? And they may say, well, it's noticing God in the world. I go for a walk with my dog every morning, and I look at it's a way of having a conversation which is natural and easy, because you're talking about your own thing, and you're asking them about their own thing, and to have a shared framework to talk about that, whether you're in the church or not, I think could be really helpful. Make that tell badge a bit less, make that tell station a bit less fearful.
Yeah. Two last comments from me. I think the one is that this feels like this is part of a journey in our church back into, or for the first time, really trusting as equal the experience as one of the foundational pillars on which our church is based. We've tended to not know what to do with experience because it seems so subjective, and yet the map and the way of life are very much asking us to enter into an experience, not to acquire knowledge or have an understanding so much as to be willing to try something, do something, be something,
Yep.
and find God in that, which is a very powerful thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
that really
absolutely.
excites me. That really excites me.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's yeah, you said it beautifully. It's a bit less around learning and a bit more about
Yeah,
trying stuff and having an experience. Because I
yeah.
think ultimately that's how we learn. It's
Mm,
through getting stuck in, having a go,
mm,
doing this, and then reflecting on it afterwards and talking about it.
yeah. And my other final comment is, the more I mature as a human being, and the more I mature in my ministry, the more I discover that people's hesitancy to engage with unknown things or to try something new, what we might feel is resistance to change, that most often that is really about some combination of a lack of confidence and skill, perceived or real. That people don't feel confident to try things and they don't feel skilled to do them. And I hope that in the use of the map, we also perhaps learn across our church's life, um, where the gaps are in people's confidence and skill. Because some of the things that might frighten us are, we could help each other along enormously with some shared learning experience and some even shared experience of doing those things, not individually but together, as part of helping people
Mm.
feel confident about the fact that they are disciples, coming back to that word which we started with, that kind of slippery, intimidating word. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. I think one of the liberating things about this is that it elevates some of the aspects of discipleship that we might have been tempted to think are kind of add-on ones. Like, for instance, the caring for yourself and for others. I'm sure you can think of people in your church who are just brilliant at that.
Yeah.
But that might in a previous incarnation of this might have been sort of seen secondary to prayer or learning or worship, say.
Mm.
But all the stations are equal. They're all valid stations. It's not the case that some are more important than others. So yeah, so people who don't necessarily have the confidence to think, people who might think I'm not a great learner, I'm not an academic, I can't really learn much. They will be brilliant at the caring or serving or helping creation flourish or telling people about their story. So yeah, it's a way of equalizing a little bit of the different aspects of discipleship, and that's really exciting to me.
Mm. Andy, it was quite short notice that I asked for your time, and thank you for giving it. And
You're welcome.
we're certainly happy to be a guinea pig and feedback whatever insights and surprises there are for us about how the map is used locally, and helps us to feel confident that we know who we are to start with, where we're standing, and then to make decisions about how we do best what we're best at, how we learn something about what we're most curious about, and maybe how we try to do something about what we're avoiding. And if the map helps us do that, we'll have progressed a long way in 3 months. So thank you for your time, Andy. It's been
I'll
a
be a
pleasure
happy
having you with
man.
us.
Thanks
Great.
ever so much for inviting me on. Thanks
It's
for
been a
all of you
pleasure.
in the church as well for giving this a go. And I pray that this will be a vehicle for you to experience the excitement and joy of being a disciple.